Dawn was just breaking over Boston, but inside the historic Trinity Church, the pre-wedding chaos was already in full swing. Staff hurried through the aisles, their footsteps echoing softly, arranging massive floral displays and polishing the golden fixtures that caught the early morning light streaming through the magnificent stained glass windows. At the heart of this controlled whirlwind stood Susan Miller, her focus absolute, her hands steady and sure. Her fingers, nimble and experienced, expertly wove delicate white orchids into blush-pink roses, crafting a floral waterfall that cascaded with an almost magical elegance. As she worked, her gaze kept flicking toward the grand entrance of the church, a nervous tick betraying a mix of anticipation and deep-seated dread. Miss Miller, a sharp voice cut through her concentration, making Susan jump. The wedding planner, clipboard in hand, was beside her. The bride insists that all the ribbons on the pews be replaced. Apparently, the cream shade doesn't match her dress. Susan gave a silent nod, though a spark of irritation flashed in her eyes. She turned to her supply cart, her fingers brushing against an old, worn photograph tucked away at the bottom. For a fleeting moment, her professional mask slipped, replaced by an expression of profound nostalgia and a sorrow that time had not erased. Outside the church, a gleaming black limousine purred to a stop. Rick Thompson stepped out, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the deep lines of worry etched on his handsome face. He adjusted his tie, his gaze sweeping over the church's impressive facade as if looking for a last-minute escape. Mr. Thompson, his assistant Brad, called out, rushing toward him with a tablet. "The stock market opened down. Should we—" Rick held up a hand, cutting the young man off. "Not today, Brad. Today, I'm just a man about to get married." Meanwhile, in a private room at the back of the church, Ashley Carter was the center of her own universe, surrounded by a team of stylists. Her couture wedding gown, encrusted with thousands of Swarovski crystals, glittered under the vanity lights. "More shimmer around the eyes," she commanded, her tone sharp and leaving no room for argument. "I want everyone to see how happy I am." Two of the makeup artists shared a quick, knowing look, but said nothing, their focus remaining on their work. As the morning progressed, a parade of luxury cars began to deposit a stream of high society guests. Photographers jostled for the best angles, their flashes popping as they captured the arrival of Boston's elite. Susan watched from a discreet corner, her breath catching at the sight of some of the powerful faces she recognized. She instinctively recoiled when a particularly stern-looking elderly couple walked past, the man, George Thompson, casting a cold, dismissive glance in her direction before entering the church. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the entrance, drawing everyone's attention. A woman in her late 20s, flanked by two identical little girls, was in a heated discussion with the security detail. "I have to get in," she insisted, her voice trembling but firm. "You don't understand. Her eyes suddenly locked with Susan's across the crowded vestibule, and for a heart-stopping second, the world seemed to grind to a halt. A lifetime of unspoken history passed between the two women in that single, shared gaze. A security guard approached Rick, whispering urgently in his ear. The groom's brow furrowed, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on the woman and the two small children. For a split second, a look of pure shock and recognition flashed across his face before being quickly replaced by his usual calm demeanor. "Let them in," he ordered, his voice low but authoritative. As the woman and the girls were escorted inside, Ashley emerged from her dressing room, a vision of bridal perfection. Her eyes shone with triumph as she took in the assembled power brokers and socialites, but her smile faltered for a moment when she noticed the unexpected new arrivals. The great bells of Trinity Church began to toll, signaling the start of the ceremony. Guests hurried to their seats, a buzz of anticipation filling the vast space. Susan finished her final adjustments, her hands now visibly trembling. She turned to make a quiet exit through a side door, but something held her back. Slowly, she turned toward the nave, her eyes meeting Rick's, just as he took his place at the altar. The organ swelled, playing the iconic wedding march. The main doors swung open, and Ashley began her procession down the aisle, but Rick's eyes weren't on his bride. They were fixed on Susan, a tempest of unreadable emotions swirling within them. The twin girls whispered excitedly, their wide eyes glued to something clutched in their hands, while the woman beside them, Emma, seemed to be physically restraining herself from jumping to her feet. As Ashley neared the altar, a palpable tension settled over the church. It was as if the entire congregation was holding its breath, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, waiting for a storm that no one could yet see. Rick finally broke his gaze from Susan, turning to face his bride, but to any close observer, it was clear that his eyes lacked the radiant joy of a man about to marry the love of his life. The guests rose, the rustle of silk and designer fabrics filling the air. Susan retreated further, almost melting into the shadows of a stone pillar, her face pale, her eyes never leaving the couple at the altar. When Ashley finally reached Rick, she smiled, a picture of victory, her fingers lacing through his. But for one last, brief moment, Rick's eyes found Susan's again, and in that single, fleeting look lay an entire library of untold stories. The priest cleared his throat, preparing to begin. A tense, expectant silence descended. It was the silence before a revelation, the kind that changes everything. Emma Miller's suburban apartment was in its usual state of Saturday morning chaos. A minefield of scattered toys covered the living room floor, and the faint smell of burnt toast lingered in the air. "Chloe! Zoe!" "Breakfast is on the table," Emma shouted, precariously balancing a stack of plates while trying to wrestle her unruly hair into a messy bun. The 7-year-old twins, a whirlwind of identical tangled curls and rumpled pajamas, burst into the kitchen. "Mom, have you seen my princess tiara?" Chloe asked, digging through a drawer of silverware. "It's not in the silverware drawer, sweetheart," Emma sighed, gently guiding her daughter away. "We'll look for it after breakfast, okay?" Zoe, the more observant of the two, pointed to her mom's phone, which was vibrating insistently on the counter. "Mom, Grandma's calling." Emma frowned as she picked it up. A call this early on a Saturday from her mother was unusual. "Girls, start eating. I'll be right back." She stepped into the hallway, closing the kitchen door. The twins exchanged curious glances, pressing their ears to the door to eavesdrop. "Mom, is everything okay?" Emma's voice was tight with worry. A long pause followed. "Wait, what? Are you sure?" Another pause. "No, don't do anything. I'll take care of it." When Emma re-entered the kitchen, her face was ashen, her eyes wide with shock. "Mom?" Zoe asked tentatively. "Are you okay?" Emma forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sure, sweetheart. Just a work thing." She grabbed her purse and began rummaging through it frantically. "Where's that old cell phone I kept?" The twins watched, bewildered, as their mother tore through drawers and cabinets, muttering to herself. Finally, with a cry of triumph, she pulled an old smartphone from a dusty cupboard. "Girls, finish your breakfast. I need to check something." Emma locked herself in the bathroom, leaving the twins alone. Chloe and Zoe looked at each other, their identical eyes wide with curiosity. "What do you think is going on?" Chloe whispered. Zoe shrugged, her perceptive gaze fixed on the bathroom door. "I don't know, but Mom's acting really strange." Inside, Emma's hands trembled as she powered on the old phone. The screen flickered to life, showing a background photo of her and her mother, Susan, smiling at a picnic years ago. It made her heart ache. She scrolled through the files until she found it, a video dated 30 years ago. Her heart pounded as she pressed play. The shaky footage showed a devastatingly handsome young man with piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through the lens. Emma gasped, recognizing those eyes instantly. They were the same ones she saw in her own reflection every day. "Sarah," the man's deep voice was filled with emotion, "I promise I'll come back for you, for both of you. No matter what my family says, I love you. I love our daughter. I'll do whatever it takes to—" The video cut off abruptly. Emma stared at the dark screen, silent tears streaming down her face. Her entire world, the entire foundation of her family's story, was crumbling around her. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "Mom?" Chloe's worried voice came through the door. "Are you crying?" Emma took a shuddering breath, trying to compose herself. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a minute." She opened the door to find the twins looking up at her with identical expressions of concern. The love and innocence in their eyes made her heart clench. How could she explain something she was only just beginning to understand herself? "Girls," she began, kneeling to their level, "remember how we've talked about different kinds of families? How some kids have 2 dads or 2 moms or just one mom like us," Zoe finished proudly. Emma swallowed hard. "Yes, exactly. Well, sometimes we find out new things about our family, things that might be a little confusing or scary at first." The twins exchanged intrigued glances. "Like what?" Chloe asked. Emma hesitated, weighing her words. "Like finding out that we might have more family than we thought." The girl's eyes widened with excitement. "Do we have a secret aunt?" Zoe asked eagerly. "Or a lost cousin?" Chloe added. A small, sad smile touched Emma's lips. Not exactly. But what if I told you might have a grandfather?" The silence that followed was absolute. The twins stared, their mouths agape, as they tried to process this bombshell. "But you always said you didn't know who our dad was," Zoe finally said, her voice small and confused. Emma's heart clenched. "I know, sweetheart, and I really didn't. But now I think I do." Chloe, always the more practical one, frowned. "So, what are we going to do about it?" Emma looked down at the phone in her hand. The image of the man in the video burned into her mind. She knew, with terrifying certainty, what she had to do. "We're going to find out the truth," she said, her voice gaining a new strength. "There's a big wedding in town today. The man in the video? The man I think might be my father. He's the groom." The twins gasped in unison, their eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Are we going to crash a wedding?" Chloe asked, her voice a nervous squeak. Emma nodded slowly. Not to ruin it, but to understand, to finally know the truth. She stood up, a new determination setting in her eyes. "Girls, put on your nicest dresses. We're going to a wedding." As the twins raced off to change, Emma stood in the hallway, the phone feeling impossibly heavy in her hand. She was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of her own life and likely hurt people in the process. But the need to know, the need for her own story to be complete, was stronger than any fear. With a deep sigh, she began to get ready, knowing that in the next few hours, for better or for worse, her life would be changed forever. The organ inside Trinity Church resonated with the majestic wedding march, its powerful chords echoing off the ancient stone walls. Ashley, radiant in her designer gown, proceeded down the central aisle with measured steps, a triumphant smile gracing her red-painted lips. Rick waited at the altar, his posture a carefully constructed mask of calm, but his eyes betrayed a restlessness that did not escape Susan, who watched from a shadowed corner of the church. The guests rose as one, a sea of expensive fabrics and glittering jewelry, their collective murmur of admiration for the bride almost a physical presence in the perfumed air. In that moment of seemingly perfect ceremony, the large rear doors of the church burst open. Emma rushed in, her twin daughters at her heels, her eyes sweeping the vast space frantically until they found Susan. "Mom?" Emma's call echoed down the now silent nave. Every head turned. Ashley froze mid-step, her veil seeming to hang suspended in time. Rick, at the altar, visibly paled. Susan took an involuntary step forward, her face a canvas of shock and fear. "Emma, what are you doing here?" Before Emma could respond, Chloe and Zoe, seizing the opportunity, dashed past her toward the altar. Zoe clutched Susan's old cell phone, her small fingers already swiping toward the video file. "Wait!" Susan shouted, trying to intercept them, but it was too late. With surprising agility, Chloe grabbed the priest's microphone. Attention, everyone! We have something really important to show you. Chaos erupted. Guests shot to their feet, muttering in confusion. Ashley, her face a mask of fury, tried to push forward through the now obstructed aisle. Rick remained frozen, his eyes locked on the twin girls who looked so much like... A triumphant grin spread across Zoe's face as she connected the phone to the church's sound system. For a moment, there was only static, and then Rick's younger, impassioned voice filled the cathedral. "Sarah, I promise I'll come back for you. For both of you, no matter what my family says. I love you. I love our daughter. I'll do whatever it takes to—" The deafening silence that followed was broken only by the frantic clicking of cameras. All eyes turned to Rick, who looked as if he had aged a decade in a few seconds. Ashley was the first to speak. "Rick, what is this?" Her voice trembled with a potent mix of rage and disbelief. Emma, recovering from her daughter's bold move, stepped forward. "I'd like to know the same thing," she said, her voice heavy with restrained emotion. "That man in the video? It's you, isn't it? And the Sarah you're talking about is my mother." The murmuring among the guests escalated into a roar. Words like scandal and illegitimate could be heard clearly. Rick, finally finding his voice, took an unsteady step down from the altar. "Emma," he whispered, his eyes taking in her features, recognizing parts of himself he hadn't seen in decades. "Are you my daughter?" Susan moved forward, positioning herself between Rick and Emma. "I'm sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted you to find out like this." Ashley, recovering from her own shock, advanced angrily. "You knew about this?" she yelled at Rick. "You have a daughter and granddaughters, and you never told me?" "He didn't know," Susan intervened, her voice surprisingly firm. "I never told him." Pandemonium broke out. Guests stood on the pews, some shouting, others rushing for the exits. The photographers who had managed to sneak in fired off flash after flash, documenting every second of the spectacular implosion. The twins, now frightened by the uproar they had caused, ran back to Emma, clinging to her legs. "Mom?" Chloe whimpered. "Did we do something wrong?" Emma hugged them tightly, her eyes never leaving Rick. "No, sweethearts, you only revealed the truth." Rick took another step toward them, his hand hesitantly outstretched. I can't believe it. All these years?" Ashley grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "This is obviously some kind of con, a scheme to get your money." Emma recoiled as if she'd been struck. "This has nothing to do with money," she said, her voice shaking with indignation. "I just wanted the truth. I wanted to know who I am." Susan stood by her daughter's side, facing Rick and Ashley. "I'm sorry for ruining your day," she said, her voice laden with years of regret. But Emma deserved to know. We all deserve the truth. Rick appeared to be fighting a fierce internal battle, his gaze darting between Susan, Emma, and the twins. "I never knew," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "I searched for you, but—" "Enough!" boomed George Thompson, Rick's father, striding forward, his face livid. The patriarch of the Thompson family glared at them all. "This is outrageous! Security, remove these people immediately!" As security guards began to advance, Emma picked up her daughters. "We're already leaving," she said coldly. "But this isn't over, not until we have all the answers." Susan cast one last, long look at Rick, a look that communicated decades of unfulfilled love and regret. Then she turned and followed her daughter and granddaughters out of the church. Rick moved as if to follow, but Ashley held him fast. "Don't even think about it," she hissed. "You have a wedding to finish." As Emma, Susan, and the twins departed, the murmur in the church reached a deafening crescendo. Reporters were already on their phones, racing to break the story. Guests argued heatedly, torn between shock, gossip, and outrage. Rick stood in the middle of it all, looking lost and defeated. The man who was moments away from getting married now faced not just the collapse of his wedding, but the utter ruin of the life he thought he knew. Meanwhile, outside Trinity Church, Emma held her daughters and her mother close, all four of them now crying tears of relief, fear, and a complex mix of emotions none of them could articulate. "What do we do now?" Susan asked quietly. Emma glanced back at the imposing church facade where her life had just been irrevocably altered. "Now," she said with a newfound resolve, "we wait. The ball's in his court. It's time for Rick Thompson to decide what kind of man, what kind of father he really wants to be." And with that, 4 generations of women walked away from the cathedral, leaving behind a wedding in ruins and an uncertain future. But for the first time in decades, a future free of secrets. The silence following the video was so dense it felt solid, as if time itself had frozen inside the lavish cathedral. Ashley was the first to break the trance, her eyes, once gleaming with triumph, now sparking with a volatile mix of fury and disbelief. She whirled on Rick, her veil swirling dramatically. "What the hell is this, Rick?" Her voice, usually so controlled, trembled with raw emotion. "Who is that woman? And what's this story about a daughter?" Rick remained motionless, his face a pale mask of shock, his eyes darting between the phones still displaying the last frame of the video. Susan, who looked as if she wanted the flowers she'd so carefully arranged to swallow her whole, and the unknown woman with the twins now advancing steadily down the aisle. The guests erupted in whispers, the sound rising like an incoming tide. Camera flashes went off incessantly, capturing every angle of the escalating drama. "Rick!" Ashley shouted, grabbing his arm. "Answer me!" Finally, he seemed to snap out of his stupor. "Ashley, I don't know what to say. I had no idea." "No idea?" She let out a bitter, incredulous laugh. "No idea you had a daughter, or no idea she'd show up at our wedding?" Meanwhile, Emma advanced with a firm, determined stride, her twins in tow. The guests parted before her like the Red Sea. "Mr. Thompson," Emma called out, her voice surprisingly steady despite her churning insides. "I believe we have a lot to talk about." Rick turned to face her, and it was like looking at a reflection from the past. The same piercing blue eyes, the same determined set of his jaw. There was no denying it. Who are you?" he managed to stammer. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 30 years of silence. "My name is Emma Miller. I'm Susan Miller's daughter. And yours." A collective gasp rippled through the church. Ashley staggered back as if physically struck, her eyes wide with horror. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Rick, say it's impossible." But Rick couldn't tear his gaze away from Emma. It was as if the rest of the world had faded away. "Susan," he called out, his voice hoarse, "is it true?" Susan, who had remained in the shadows, stepped into the light, silent tears tracing paths down her cheeks. "Yes, Rick, it's true. Emma is our daughter." Pandemonium erupted. Guests shot to their feet, some shouting, others scrambling for the exits as journalists and photographers went into a feeding frenzy, their flashes illuminating the scene like a lightning storm. "This is outrageous." Rick's mother, a stern-looking woman with perfectly coiffed gray hair, shouted from the front pew. "That woman is obviously lying to get money." "Money?" Emma retorted, her voice sharp with outrage. "I don't want any money. I just want the truth." The twins, frightened by the shouting, clung to Emma's legs. Chloe, the braver of the two, piped up, "Stop yelling. You're scaring everyone." Surprisingly, her small, childish voice created a momentary lull, the volume in the church dropping, though the tension remained thick enough to cut with a knife. Ashley, recovering from her initial shock, suddenly rounded on Rick. "Did you know about this all this time? Did you know?" Rick shook his head, still dazed. "No, Ashley, I swear, I had no idea." "How could you not know you had a daughter?" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the vaulted ceiling. 30 years, Rick, 30 years of lies." "They weren't lies," Susan interjected, her voice soft but firm. "Rick never knew. I never told him." The revelation hit Rick like a physical blow. He turned to Susan, his eyes filled with pain and betrayal. "Why, Susan? Why did you never tell me?" The priest, who had been watching the scene unfold in stunned silence, finally found his voice. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in a more private setting. But it was too late. The media in the room were already live-streaming, every word, every expression captured for the world to see. This was the scandal of the century, and they weren't about to miss a second. Private? Ashley laughed, a hysterical broken sound. There's nothing private about this. My wedding has been ruined in front of all of Boston society. How could you do this to me, Rick? I didn't do anything. Rick finally found his voice, a note of desperation in it. Ashley, you have to believe me. I knew nothing of this. Emma, seeing the situation spiraling further out of control, stepped forward. Look, I didn't come here to cause trouble. I just wanted to know the truth. Spending your entire life without knowing who your father is. It hurts. Her words seemed to find a crack in Rick's armor. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. I'm so sorry, he said softly. If I had known. But you didn't know, Ashley interrupted bitterly. And now here we are, on what should have been the happiest day of my life, dealing with the ghosts of your past. The twins, sensing Emma's sadness, hugged their mother tighter, their simple, innocent gesture bringing a sudden wave of reality to the chaotic scene. Rick looked at Emma and the girls, then at Susan, and finally at Ashley. The weight of his decisions, of paths not taken, was visible in his eyes. I think, he said slowly, we all have a lot to talk about. At that moment, with the press documenting his every word and the guests watching in stunned fascination, it became brutally clear that nothing would ever be the same. The wedding of the year had become the scandal of the decade, and the lives of everyone involved were about to change forever. The sound of a champagne flute shattering on the marble floor was a final sharp punctuation mark to the broken dream lying at everyone's feet. The chaos that followed the revelation felt endless. Guests whispered and pointed, some already slipping out of the church, eager to be the first to spread the juiciest gossip Boston had seen in years. Camera flashes were a relentless storm, capturing each shocked expression, every falling tear. Rick Thompson, the groom who minutes ago was about to say, "I do," now stood like a defeated man, his shoulders slumped, his pale face a stark contrast to his impeccable tuxedo. He looked from Ashley to Emma and then to Susan, as if he couldn't process how all these women were tangled in his life in such different, complicated ways. Ashley, still in her wedding gown that had cost a small fortune, resembled a marble statue, beautiful but cold and unmoving. Her eyes, however, burned with an icy fury. "It's over," she finally said, her voice slicing through the crowd's murmuring like a razor. "The wedding is off." Those words seemed to break a spell. Suddenly, everything accelerated. Guests stood in unison, some rushing to console Ashley, others simply fleeing the disastrous scene. Rick's parents advanced, their faces a mixture of shock and anger. "Rick, you can't allow this," his father, George, thundered. "Think of the scandal, the company." But Rick seemed not to hear him. His eyes were fixed on Emma and the twins, who clung to their mother as if she were a lifeboat in a stormy sea. "I have a daughter," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "And granddaughters." Ashley let out a bitter, sharp laugh. "Oh, how lovely. An instant family." "Well, Rick, since we're revealing secrets," she paused for dramatic effect, her gaze sweeping the captive audience before locking back on Rick. "I'm pregnant, too." The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum of sound that was more shocking than any noise. Rick staggered as if he'd been punched, his hand reaching out for the support of the altar behind him. "Pregnant?" he whispered, incredulous. Ashley nodded, a triumphant, painful smile playing on her lips. "Yes, darling, you're going to be a father." Again, apparently. Emma, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and guilt, took a step forward. "Look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to ruin anyone's wedding. I only wanted answers." Susan placed a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. "It's not your fault, dear. It's mine. I should have told the truth a long time ago." At that moment, a man in an expensive suit, Mr. Sterling, pushed through the crowd and approached Susan, his face red with anger. "Susan Miller?" Susan turned, recognizing her boss immediately. "Mr. Sterling, I can explain." "Explain?" he exploded. "Explain how you turned the most important wedding of the year into a circus? How you embarrassed our company in front of all of high society?" He paused, taking a deep breath before delivering the final blow. "You're fired, and be sure you'll never work another prestigious event in this city." Susan went pale but remained composed. I understand, sir. I'm sorry for the trouble." Emma hugged her mother protectively. "Mom, we'll figure something out. Don't worry." The twins, sensing the tension, pressed closer to Emma and Susan. "Grandma," Chloe asked in a small, frightened voice, "why is that mean man yelling at you?" The innocent question seemed to pull Rick back to reality. He approached them tentatively. "Susan, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. If there's anything I can do—" "Don't you dare!" Ashley screamed, grabbing his arm. "You owe her nothing. She lied to you for 30 years. Rick gently pulled his arm away. "Ashley, please, we need to handle this civilly." "Civilly?" She laughed hysterically. "There's nothing civil about this. Our wedding is destroyed, reporters are everywhere, and suddenly you have a secret family." As if to emphasize her point, the sound of news helicopters could be heard hovering overhead. The priest, who had been watching everything with a mix of horror and fascination, finally intervened again. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in a more private place, for everyone's sake." Rick nodded slowly. "Yes, I think that would be best." He turned to Emma, Susan, and the twins. Would you like to come to my house? I think we have a lot to talk about." Before they could answer, Ashley stepped between them. "Your house? You mean our house? Where I live? Where our baby will grow up?" Her voice shook with emotion. "No, Rick. You need to choose. Now, your new family, or the one you were about to start with me." The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. All eyes turned to Rick, waiting. He looked at Ashley, the woman who had been by his side for years, now carrying his child. Then his gaze shifted to Emma, the daughter he never knew he had, and the granddaughters he'd just discovered. Finally, his eyes met Susan's, and for a moment it was as if they were young and in love again. Rick began, his voice faltering. "I can't choose? Not like this. Not now. I need time to process all of this." Ashley recoiled as if struck. "Time? You want time?" She ripped the veil from her hair and threw it at Rick's feet. "Well, take all the time in the world, Rick, because I won't be waiting." With that, she turned and marched down the aisle, guests parting to let her pass, the sharp clack of her heels on the marble floor punctuating the shocked silence. Rick stood there, looking lost and defeated. Emma, still holding her mother and daughters close, felt a wave of both guilt and compassion. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, maybe it's best we let things cool down. We can talk another day when everything's calmer." He nodded slowly, grateful for the out. "Yes, I think that would be best. But please, call me Rick." As the makeshift family prepared to leave the church, bracing for the inevitable media storm outside, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same. The wedding of the year had become the scandal of the decade, and the lives of all involved had been irrevocably altered. Susan, now jobless and exposed, Emma, finally face to face with the father she never knew, and Rick, torn between a past he never knew he had and a future he thought he was building, all faced a new dawn. Uncertain and frightening, but also full of possibility. The weeks following the disastrous non-wedding were a media whirlwind for everyone involved. The press, like predators smelling blood, gave no quarter. Cameras and microphones seemed to sprout from the pavement at every corner, relentlessly pursuing the key players in this real-life soap opera. Rick Thompson, once a revered businessman and a pillar of Boston society, now could barely leave his Back Bay home without being ambushed by a horde of reporters hungry for a sensational quote. His company, Thompson Enterprises, suffered from the public fallout of his personal life. On one particularly tense morning, Rick sat in his office, staring at the stack of newspapers on his desk. The headline screamed, "Tycoon hid daughter for 30 years, pregnant fiancé, abandoned at the altar, Thompson Enterprises shares plummet after family scandal." He let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his graying hair. The phone rang, making him jump. "Mr. Thompson," his secretary's shaky voice came through the intercom. "The board is demanding an emergency meeting. They're talking about temporarily removing you from the presidency." Rick closed his eyes, feeling the immense weight of it all. "Tell them I'll be there in an hour." Meanwhile, across town, Emma was dealing with her own version of hell. The small suburban apartment that was once her sanctuary now felt like a prison, the curtains constantly drawn in a futile attempt to keep the prying eyes of the world at bay. "Mom," Zoe's hesitant voice came from the bedroom doorway. "There are more reporters downstairs. They're yelling your name." Emma sighed, pulling her daughter into a tight hug. "I know, sweetheart. They'll leave eventually. We just have to be patient." But patience was wearing thin. The phone rang off the hook with journalists, talk show bookers, and even reality TV producers offering fortunes for an exclusive interview. Emma had been forced to take a leave of absence from her job, unable to face the curious stares and hushed whispers of her coworkers. Susan, who had moved in temporarily to help with the girls, entered the room with a steaming cup of tea. "I thought you could use this," she said softly, handing Emma the cup. "The girls are asking about school. I don't think we can keep them home forever." Emma nodded sadly. "I know. I just wish I could protect them from all of this." The next morning, with heavy hearts, Emma and Susan walked Chloe and Zoe back to Oakwood Elementary. The playground, usually buzzing with laughter, fell eerily silent as they arrived. Parents and children alike turned to stare, some with open curiosity, others with clear disapproval. "Remember, girls," Emma knelt in front of them, "you're strong and you're brave. No matter what anyone says, you know who you are." The twins nodded solemnly, their small faces a mixture of determination and fear, before hugging them goodbye and walking into school, hand in hand. The day passed in an agony of slow motion for Emma, every minute filled with worry. When pickup time finally arrived, her heart sank at the dejected looks on her daughters' faces. In the car, the silence was deafening. Finally, Chloe spoke, her voice small and shaky. "Mom, why is everyone so mean? Tommy said we're bastards, whatever that means. And Sarah said you're a gold digger." Emma felt like she'd been punched in the gut. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, fighting back tears. "Sometimes people say awful things when they don't understand a situation. But that doesn't make those things true." Zoe, ever the observer, asked, "Is it because of Grandpa Rick? Because we found out who he is?" Emma nodded slowly. "Yes, partly. But remember, we didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes life is just complicated, and people don't always get that." That night, after the twins had finally cried themselves to sleep, Emma allowed herself to break down. Susan found her in the kitchen, sobbing silently over a mug of cold tea. "Oh, my dear," Susan murmured, wrapping her arms around her daughter. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. If I had just been honest from the start—" Emma pulled away, wiping her tears. "No, Mom. You did what you thought was best. We can't change the past. We can only deal with the present." Across town, Rick was facing his own crisis. The board meeting had been brutal. While they hadn't ousted him, his authority had been severely curtailed. Trust from both investors and the public was shattered. Sitting in his darkened office, a glass of untouched whiskey before him, he contemplated the swift collapse of his life. The sharp click of approaching heels broke the silence. Ashley entered, her face a mask of cold determination. "The divorce papers," she said, tossing a folder onto his desk. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours to discuss alimony and custody." Rick looked up at her, noticing for the first time the slight curve of her stomach. "Ashley, please. can we talk about this?" "About us?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Us? There is no us, Rick. You made your choice when you decided your new family was more important than we were." "I chose nothing," he protested. "I just asked for time to understand all of this." Ashley shook her head. "Time is a luxury we don't have, Rick. I'm not going to wait around while you try to fix 30 years of lies and secrets." With that, she turned and left, leaving Rick alone with his regrets. As night fell, 4 tormented souls in different parts of the city contemplated their uncertain futures. Emma, determined to protect her daughters. Susan, burdened by decades of secrets. Rick, struggling to salvage his reputation and figure out how to be a father. And Ashley, navigating the turbulent waters of a broken heart and an unexpected pregnancy. The scandal continued to ripple outward, and as the world watched and judged, they each tried to find a path through the chaos, seeking redemption, understanding, and perhaps a new beginning. Fall arrived in Boston, painting the trees along the Charles River in brilliant shades of red and gold. For Rick Thompson, the seasonal change mirrored the transformations in his own life. After weeks of turmoil and public scrutiny, he finally worked up the courage to take the first step. His heart pounded as he parked his car in front of the modest apartment building where Emma lived. He hesitated, his fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel, before taking a deep breath and getting out. Inside, Emma was finishing getting the twins ready for school when the doorbell rang. She exchanged an apprehensive look with Susan, who was in the kitchen making breakfast. "It must be him," Susan murmured, her face a mixture of anxiety and hope. Emma nodded, kneeling before her daughters. "Remember what we talked about, okay? Be polite, but you don't have to do or say anything you don't want to." The girls nodded solemnly, their small hands clasped together. Emma opened the door to find Rick looking slightly out of place in his expensive suit on the simple landing. "Good morning, Emma," he said, his voice betraying a slight tremor. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Emma stepped aside. "No, you're not. The girls are almost ready for school." Rick entered hesitantly, his eyes taking in the cozy apartment before they settled on the twins, who were watching him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Hello," he said softly, crouching slightly to their level. I guess I'm your grandfather." Chloe, ever the bold one, took a step forward. "You're the man from the video, the one who made Mom cry." The words hit Rick like a physical blow. Yes, I am. And I'm very sorry. I never meant to make your mom cry." Zoe, who had been watching intently, asked, "Are you going to stay with us now?" The innocent question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Emma quickly intervened. "Girls, it's time for school. Grandma Susan is taking you today, okay?" Susan emerged from the kitchen, giving Rick a meaningful look before ushering the girls out. "Come on, sweethearts. Let your mom and your grandfather talk a bit." After the door closed, a heavy silence filled the room. Emma gestured for Rick to sit, taking a chair opposite him. "So," she began, "what brings you here, Mr. Thompson?" "Please, call me Rick," he requested. I came to try to fix things, to get to know you better, to understand." Emma studied him for a moment. "Understand what, exactly?" "Everything," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "How I could have missed 30 years of your life. How Susan could have kept this from me. How I can be a father now, when you're already an adult with your own family." Emma sighed, the tension in her shoulders palpable. "It won't be easy, you know. We can't just pretend all that time never passed." Rick nodded. "I know, but I'm willing to try, if you are." Meanwhile, at a nearby Starbucks, Susan and the twins waited for the school bell to ring. Susan watched her granddaughters play with their cake pops, her heart heavy with memories. "Grandma," Chloe called, pulling Susan from her reverie. "Did you love Grandpa Rick?" Susan felt her throat tighten. "Yes, sweetheart, I loved him very much." "Then why didn't you stay together?" Zoe asked, her big eyes full of curiosity. Susan hesitated, searching for the right words. Sometimes, even when two people love each other, things get complicated. But what matters is that love gave me your mom, and that led to both of you. Back at the apartment, Rick and Emma were deep in conversation. He listened intently as she spoke of her childhood, her dreams, her struggles as a single mother. "You're amazing, Emma," Rick said, his voice choking. "I'm so sorry I missed it all." Tears pricked at Emma's eyes. "It wasn't easy. There were times I really needed a dad." Rick reached out hesitantly, his hand lightly touching her arm. "I know I can't make up for lost time, but I'm here now. If you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your life, part of the girls' lives." Emma nodded slowly. "I think we can try, but it'll take time, and we have to think of the girls first." Meanwhile, across town, Ashley sat in her own luxurious apartment, looking at a paparazzi photo on her phone of Rick entering Emma's building. Her face twisted in resentment as she caressed her slightly swollen belly. "Seems Daddy's busy getting to know his new family," she muttered bitterly to her unborn child. "But don't worry, we don't need him." At the Starbucks, Susan checked the time. "It's time to go, girls. We don't want you to be late." As they walked toward the school, Susan couldn't help but think of Rick, memories of their youthful romance flooding her mind. At the apartment, Rick and Emma were wrapping up. "I'd like to help financially," Rick offered. "I know you said you don't want money, but as a father, I feel it's my responsibility." Emma hesitated. "I don't know, Rick. I don't want it to look like I'm taking advantage." "Please," he insisted, "let me do this, at least for the girls, for their education, their future." After a moment, Emma nodded. "Okay, but we'll set clear boundaries, all right?" Rick smiled, a wave of relief washing over him. "Of course, we'll do it your way." When Susan and the twins returned, they found Emma and Rick sitting side by side on the couch, looking through an old photo album. The atmosphere felt lighter, hopeful. "Hello," Susan said softly, her eyes meeting Rick's. Rick stood, his heart accelerating. "Hi, Susan. It's been a long time." The twins ran to hug their mother, but their eyes were on Rick. "Girls," Emma said, "how about showing Grandpa Rick some of your drawings?" As the children scampered off, the three adults exchanged looks laden with unspoken history. There was so much to resolve, but in that moment there was a spark of hope, the promise of a new beginning. Across town, Ashley closed her curtains forcefully. She had her own plans, and Rick Thompson hadn't seen the last of her. Rick Thompson's office at Thompson Enterprises buzzed with its usual Monday morning energy. Executives hurried down the corridors, phones rang incessantly, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Yet for Rick, it all felt distant, almost surreal. Seated in his leather chair, he stared at an old photograph in his hands, a young couple smiling in a sunlit park, himself and Susan, 3 decades ago. His fingers lightly traced her face, lost in memory. A quiet knock on the door pulled him back. Mr. Thompson, his assistant, Brad, called timidly, "There's a call for you on line 2. It's Miss Carter." Rick exhaled heavily. Ashley. He couldn't avoid her forever. "Thank you, Brad. I'll take it." Picking up the phone, he braced himself. "Ashley, how are you?" The voice on the other end was like ice. "Save the niceties, Rick. I've seen the pictures. You really think you can replace our family with that sham?" Rick frowned. "What pictures? What are you talking about?" "Oh, don't play dumb," Ashley hissed. "You leaving that woman's apartment, playing happy family with her and those kids? Have you forgotten you have a child on the way here?" Rick's heart sank. He had no idea he was being followed. "Jessica, it's not like that. I'm just trying to get to know my daughter." "Your daughter?" Ashley interrupted with a bitter laugh. "A woman you didn't even know existed a few weeks ago? What about your son, Rick? The one who isn't even born yet?" Before Rick could reply, she hung up. He stood there, phone in hand, feeling the weight of the world. Meanwhile, in a coffee shop across the city, Emma and Susan were having a quiet lunch. "So," Susan began tentatively, "how was yesterday with Rick?" Emma sipped her coffee. It was surprisingly good. He really seems to want to be part of our lives. Susan nodded slowly, a mix of emotions on her face. That's good, right? It's what you've always wanted. It is, but Emma hesitated. I can't help thinking about how different everything might have been if... Before she could finish, her phone buzzed. Her face went pale as she read the notification. What is it? Susan asked, alarmed. Emma showed her the screen, a paparazzi photo of Rick leaving her apartment with the headline, Tycoon Abandons Pregnant Fiancée for Secret Family. Oh my God, Susan whispered. Who would do this? Emma shook her head. I don't know, but this is going to make everything worse. Back at his office, Rick was buried in old files, determined to find out what really happened. He searched for clues about his split from Susan and found something intriguing. A series of suspicious bank transfers made by his father around the time Susan disappeared. What did you do, Dad? Rick murmured, anger and disappointment rising in his chest. While the adults dealt with their intrigues, Chloe and Zoe were busy with their own plans. In their bedroom, they whispered excitedly. We need to make Grandpa Rick and Grandma Susan get back together, Chloe exclaimed. Yeah, Zoe added, just like in Disney movies, we can set up a romantic dinner for them. They spent the afternoon drawing elaborate invitations, completely unaware that at that very moment Ashley was in her apartment, planning something far less innocent. Yes, exactly, she spoke into her phone. I want you to dig up everything on this Emma Miller, past, finances, anything we can use, and make sure you verify the legitimacy of this so-called paternity. I want results fast. Hanging up, she smiled. She played to win. That evening, when Emma got home, she was met by a visibly upset Susan holding a stack of letters, from old friends, former co-workers, even distant relatives, all asking about the scandal. This is getting out of control, Emma murmured. Just then, Chloe and Zoe burst in, holding their homemade invitations. Mom! Grandma! Look what we made, they exclaimed. Emma forced a smile. What have you got there, girls? It's for a special dinner, Chloe explained, for Grandpa Rick and Grandma Susan, so they can be together again, like a real family. Emma and Susan exchanged worried glances. That's very sweet, girls, Susan began gently, but things are a little more complicated than that. The twins looked disappointed. But we can at least try, right? Chloe insisted. Please? Seeing their hopeful faces, Emma felt a pang of guilt. Maybe, amid all the chaos, a little innocence was exactly what they all needed. You know what? She said, surprising even herself. Let's do it. Let's have that special dinner. The twins squealed with delight, and as Emma watched them, she decided that for just one evening she would allow her family to dream of a happy ending. The sun had barely risen when Emma's phone rang, jolting her awake. Emma, it's Jennifer from the office, the tense voice whispered. You need to see this. It's in all the papers. Fully awake now, Emma turned on the TV while opening her laptop. The headlines hit her like a punch. Thompson scandal, gold digger or true love. And source claims Susan Miller extorted millions from Rick Thompson 30 years ago. The stories implied Susan had received a huge sum to disappear with the child. This is ridiculous, Emma muttered, but a seed of doubt was planted. Across town, Rick faced his own storm. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Mr. Thompson, his assistant, burst in. Miss Carter is here. She insists on seeing you. Before Rick could respond, Ashley stormed in, eyes flashing with rage. How could you? She shouted, throwing a newspaper on his desk. First you abandoned me, and now this. Defending a swindler. Rick stood firm. Ashley, please, none of this is true. Someone is clearly trying to manipulate us. Ashley laughed bitterly. Oh, someone's being manipulated here, Rick, and that someone is you. Meanwhile, in Emma's small apartment, Susan stared at the headlines in horror, her hands shaking. Mom, Emma said softly, this isn't true, is it? The hurt in Susan's eyes was answer enough. How could you even think that, Emma? After everything? Emma immediately felt guilty. "I'm sorry, Mom. It's just, all of this is so confusing." Just then, the twins entered the kitchen, their faces worried. "Mom," Chloe began, "the kids at school are saying weird things about Grandma and Grandpa Rick." "What are they saying, honey?" Susan asked gently. Zoe answered, "They said Grandma is a husband stealer and we're bastards." She whispered the last word as if it were dirty. A surge of anger shot through Emma. "That's a lie, girls. Don't believe any of it." But the damage was done. Later that day, Susan decided to brave the outside world. The moment she stepped into the local market, she felt the stares and heard the whispers. "That's her, the woman from the Thompson scandal," one person muttered. "I heard she's been planning this for years," said another. At the checkout, the clerk, a woman Susan had known for years, refused to meet her eye. Back at Rick's office, things were no better. "Mr. Thompson," his lawyer said gravely, "we need to consider the possibility these accusations have some basis. Perhaps it's best if you distance yourself from Susan and Emma for now." Rick shook his head vehemently. "No, I won't abandon them again. There must be another explanation." At that moment, his phone buzzed. A message from Emma. "We need to talk. It's urgent." Rick's heart sank. Meanwhile, Ashley watched it all unfold from her luxurious apartment with a satisfied smile, stroking her growing belly. "You see, little one," she murmured, "Mommy knows exactly how to deal with threats to our family." Back in Emma's apartment, the tension was palpable. The twins were in their room while the adults tried to handle the crisis. "Emma," Susan pleaded, "you have to believe me. I would never do something like this." Emma wanted to believe her, but the doubts nagged. "Then why did you never tell me about the money, Mom? Where did it come from for my education?" Before Susan could answer, the doorbell rang. It was Rick. The atmosphere grew even heavier. Emma looked at him, accusation in her eyes. "Did you know about this? About the money?" Rick seemed genuinely confused. "What money?" Susan stepped in, her voice trembling. "The money I got 30 years ago, to go away." The shock on Rick's face was undeniable. "Susan, I would never have done something like that." As the three adults stood there, grappling with doubts, the twins peeked out from their bedroom. "Emma," Chloe whispered, "I don't think our plan for the special dinner will work." Zoe nodded sadly. "Maybe fairy tales aren't real after all?" The tension in the apartment was so thick it was hard to breathe. The dream of a reunited family feeling more distant than ever as Ashley's lies and manipulations took hold, threatening to destroy the fragile bonds just beginning to form. Rick Thompson's office was steeped in tense silence. Sitting in his leather chair, he stared at a pile of documents, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Beside him, his private investigator, Tony, waited nervously. "Are you sure about this, Tony?" Rick asked, his voice hoarse. Tony nodded grimly. "Yes, sir. All the evidence points to Miss Carter. She orchestrated everything. The rumors, the leaked photos, even the false accusations against Mrs. Miller." Rick closed his eyes, the sting of this revelation sharp and painful. Ashley, the woman he had almost married, the mother of his unborn child, had engineered the entire smear campaign. Anger and disappointment consumed him. "Call Emma and Susan," he said finally. "It's time to clear all this up." Meanwhile, in Emma's apartment, the tension was palpable. Susan sat rigidly on the couch while Emma paced back and forth, her mind a swirl of conflicting emotions. "Mom," Emma began, her voice trembling, "why did you never tell me about the money?" Susan let out a deep sigh. "Emma, sweetheart, Before she could finish, Emma's phone rang. It was Rick, asking them to come to his office immediately, an urgency in his voice they couldn't ignore. "Let's go," Emma said to Susan. "Maybe we'll finally get some answers." In Rick's office, the air crackled with tension. "Please sit," he said, indicating the chairs in front of him. "We have a lot to discuss." Emma glared at him, distrust in her eyes. "What is all this about, Rick?" He drew a deep breath. I found out who's behind these accusations and rumors. It was Ashley. The silence that followed was deafening. Susan turned pale, while Emma looked from Rick to her mother in disbelief. "What do you mean, Ashley?" Emma finally asked. Rick began to explain, showing them the evidence his investigator had gathered. Photos, emails, bank transactions, all pointing to a deliberate campaign of sabotage orchestrated by Ashley. "But why?" Susan whispered, her voice barely audible. "Jealousy," Rick answered simply. "Fear of losing what she thought was hers." Emma stood abruptly, her emotions on edge. "That doesn't explain the money, Rick. The money my mother received 30 years ago." Rick frowned, confused. "What money?" Susan interjected, her voice unsteady. "The money I was given to leave with Emma, to disappear." The shock on Rick's face was genuine. "Susan, I swear I know nothing about that. I never would have done such a thing." At that moment, the office door flew open. Ashley stormed in, her face twisted with fury. "How dare you," she shouted at Rick, "investigate me behind my back." Rick stood, his voice firm. "That's enough, Ashley. We know everything. The lies, the manipulations. Why did you do it?" Ashley let out a bitter laugh. "Why? Because you were about to throw everything away for a family you barely knew. What about us? What about our baby?" Emma, who had been in shock, stepped forward. "That doesn't justify what you've done. Do you have any idea how many people you've hurt? How many children?" Ashley turned to her, eyes flashing. "Oh, please, don't act like you're innocent in all of this. You show up out of nowhere, claiming a part of Rick's life that no longer existed." Susan, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "We didn't claim anything. It was an accident, a mistake by the girls. We never intended to cause problems." "Lies!" Ashley shouted. "You were paid to leave. You sold your daughter." The heavy silence that followed weighed on everyone. All eyes turned to Susan, who seemed to have aged years in seconds. "It's true," she finally admitted, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I did receive money. But it wasn't from Rick." Rick stepped closer, his voice gentle. "From whom, Susan?" She looked directly into his eyes. "From your father, Rick. He paid me to leave, to never look for you again. He said he'd ruin my life, and Emma's, if I didn't accept." The revelation fell like a bomb. Rick staggered back, stunned. Emma covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Emma asked, her voice breaking. Susan sobbed. "I was ashamed, sweetheart, and scared. Afraid you'd hate me, think I chose money over love." Rick knelt beside Susan, taking her hands. "Susan, I'm so sorry. If I'd known, if I'd even suspected." Ashley watched the scene, her face a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, jealousy, and a flicker of guilt. "It changes nothing," she said, but her voice had lost its conviction. Emma turned to her, her eyes now filled with understanding and pity. "It changes everything, Ashley. You built your actions on lies and manipulations. This has to stop." Rick stood facing Ashley. "She's right. It ends now. What you did. I can't forgive it easily, but for the sake of our baby, we need to find a way forward." For the first time, Ashley looked truly shaken. "What about us, Rick? What about our future?" He shook his head sadly. "I don't know if we still have a future, Ashley, but we do have a child, and that's where our focus needs to be." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Emma embraced her mother, years of doubt finally dispelled. Rick looked at them, remorse and hope mingling in his eyes. Ashley, feeling defeated, stepped toward the door. "This isn't over," she said, but there was little conviction in her voice. As she left, the three, Rick, Susan, and Emma, found themselves united by a newfound understanding. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in decades, there was a real chance for reconciliation, and perhaps a new beginning. The shrill sound of a siren cut through the Boston night as an ambulance raced through the streets. Inside, Ashley Carter lay pale and motionless, her breathing shallow. Beside her, Rick Thompson held her hand, his face etched with worry and fear. Hours earlier, she had called him in a panic, screaming about severe pain and bleeding. Despite everything, Rick hadn't hesitated. At Mount Sinai Hospital, the scene was chaotic. Doctors and nurses rushed back and forth, urgent voices echoing through the corridors. Rick was forced to wait outside the emergency room, his heart hammering. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor emerged, his expression grim. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry, but Ashley had a miscarriage. We couldn't save the baby." The words hit Rick like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, dizzy and sick. The child he had imagined, dreamed of, was gone. Can I see her?" he managed to mumble. The doctor nodded solemnly, guiding him to the room. Ashley looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, her eyes red and swollen. When she saw Rick, her face contorted with pain. "Rick," she whispered, her voice raspy, I need to tell you something." He approached, gently taking her hand. "Shh, you don't have to talk now. You need to rest." She shook her head emphatically. "No, you need to know. The baby wasn't yours?" The world seemed to freeze. "What?" Tears streamed down her face. "It was my ex-boyfriend's, Mark. We got together a few weeks before our engagement. I thought it might be yours, but—" Rick dropped her hand as if it were on fire. He backed away, his mind reeling. "Why?" he managed, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do that?" Ashley closed her eyes, shame palpable. "I never really loved you, Rick. Not truly. I just wanted the stability, the financial security you could offer." Each word was a knife. He stumbled backward, feeling betrayed, used, utterly devastated. All these years, was it all a lie? "I'm sorry, Rick," she sobbed, unable to meet his eyes. "I truly am." He left the room in a state of shock, his legs barely supporting him. In the corridor, he found Emma, who had been called by the hospital as his emergency contact. "Rick, what happened? Are you okay?" The genuine concern in her voice was his undoing. He looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. "The baby wasn't mine. Ashley, she lied about everything." Emma gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Without thinking, she wrapped him in a tight hug. Rick broke down in her arms, deep sobs racking his body. In the days that followed, the news spread. Susan and the twins were shocked and saddened by the loss, even after learning the truth. Rick withdrew from everything, struggling to process the dual loss of the child he believed was his and the entire foundation of his relationship with Ashley. A week later, the family gathered at Emma's apartment. The air was heavy. "How is he?" Susan asked softly. Emma sighed, rubbing her temples. "Destroyed. He feels betrayed, used, like his entire world collapsed." The twins, sitting quietly on the couch, exchanged worried glances. "Is Grandpa Rick going to be okay?" Chloe asked. Emma knelt before them. "It'll take time, sweeties. Grandpa Rick is really sad right now, but with our love and support, he'll get through this." Susan moved closer, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. "And what about you, dear? How are you coping?" Emma let out a shaky breath. "It's complicated. Part of me feels terrible for what he's going through. Another part feels a small relief that there's no longer that obstacle between us." "That doesn't make you a bad person, Emma," Susan reassured her. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was Rick, looking exhausted and worn. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced," he said, his voice raspy. I didn't want to be alone." Emma gently guided him inside. The twins rushed to hug him. For a moment, Rick looked surprised, then he melted into their embrace. "We're here for you, Grandpa," Zoe said, her voice full of innocent love. Tears welled in Rick's eyes. Glancing at Emma, Susan, and the twins, he felt a surge of gratitude. Despite the pain, he was not alone. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank you for being my family." In that moment of grief, there was also a spark of hope. The road ahead would be long, but they would walk it together. In the days following these shocking events, everyone's resilience was tested. Emma's apartment became a refuge, a place for healing. One Saturday morning, the aroma of pancakes filled the small kitchen. Rick stood at the stove, shirt sleeves rolled up, a makeshift apron tied around his waist. Chloe and Zoe watched in fascination as he deftly flipped the pancakes. "Wow, Grandpa," Chloe exclaimed. "How do you do that?" Rick grinned, his first genuine smile in weeks. "Years of practice, sweetie. Want to try?" He carefully guided her hand, and when they succeeded, the kitchen erupted in laughter. Emma, watching from the doorway, felt her heart warm. Susan joined her, carrying a basket of fresh fruit. "Who would have thought," she murmured, "Rick Thompson, business magnate, making pancakes on a Saturday morning?" The two women exchanged a loaded glance. After breakfast, while the twins got ready for a trip to the park, the adults gathered in the living room. I want to thank you," Rick began, his voice thick with emotion, "for taking me in, even after everything." Susan reached for his hand. "We're a family, Rick. Maybe not in the conventional sense, but we are." Emma nodded. "And families stand by each other during hard times." Rick swallowed, fighting tears. "I've lost so much time." "What matters is that we have now," Susan said softly. "We can't change the past, but we can build a future." Their day at the park was a bittersweet mix of fun and reflection. Rick joined in games of hide-and-seek, laughing in a way he hadn't for years. In a quieter moment, as the girls fed ducks, Susan approached him. "They adore you," she observed. Rick nodded, a gentle smile on his face. "They're amazing." Susan hesitated. "Rick, about the past? About your father's money?" He raised a hand, stopping her. "Susan, we don't need to talk about that now. What matters is the present and the future we can build." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving us this chance." Across the park, Emma watched her parents interact. It was strange, yet there was something there, a connection that 3 decades hadn't erased. That evening, over dinner, the twins surprised everyone. "We have an idea," Zoe exclaimed. Chloe continued, "What if we make a family album with new and old pictures?" The suggestion caught the adults off guard, but they soon embraced it. In the days that followed, the album became a mission. Susan dug out old photos, sharing stories of a young Emma. Rick contributed pictures from his youth, including one lost moment with Susan. Each photo was a piece of the puzzle connecting past and present. One night, while gluing the last photos, Emily noticed something extraordinary. Rick and Susan were sitting side by side, heads inclined over an old photo, an intimacy in the moment that transcended time. "Just look at you two," Emma remarked softly. Rick and Susan glanced at each other, a slight blush coloring their cheeks. "Group hug!" the twins shouted, launching themselves onto the adults. Laughter filled the room as they all squeezed onto the couch. As the night wore on, the 3 adults stayed up talking quietly. There were still wounds to heal, but there was also hope. "Thank you," Rick said simply, "for giving me a second chance, for letting me be part of this family." Emma smiled, taking his hand. "We're all learning together, Dad. One day at a time." Susan nodded. "And each day is a new opportunity to do better." A sense of peace settled over the apartment. The road ahead was still daunting, but together it felt far less frightening. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting a gentle glow. Susan sat at the mirror, nervously adjusting a pearl necklace. Her reflection showed a radiant woman in a simple but elegant ivory dress. The door opened, and Emma entered, a broad smile on her face. "Mom, you look beautiful." Susan turned, her eyes brimming with tears. "Oh, Emma, I never thought this day would come." Emma took her mother's hands. "But here we are, and you deserve all the happiness in the world." Across the house, Rick straightened his tie, his hands trembling slightly as Chloe and Zoe watched, already dressed as adorable flower girls. "Grandpa, are you nervous?" Chloe asked. He smiled, kneeling to their level. "A little, honey. Sometimes even grown-ups get nervous about important things." Zoe tilted her head. "But you love Grandma Susan, right?" "More than I ever imagined possible," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. The backyard of the country home Rick had bought in rural New England was transformed. Rows of white chairs faced a wooden arch entwined with roses and ivy. The few guests, only close family and friends, began to take their seats. The atmosphere was intimate, a world away from the grand, impersonal wedding that had almost been. Soft music began to play. The twins came first, tossing rose petals, followed by Emma, her expression emotional. Finally, Susan appeared. Rick's heart skipped a beat. 30 years had passed, but it felt like no time at all. As she walked toward him, memories flooded his mind. The first date, the whispered promises, the painful separation, the regret. And now, a new chapter. The officiant, an old friend, spoke of second chances and true love. When it came time for the vows, there wasn't a dry eye. "Susan," Rick began, his voice trembling, "for 30 years, I've lived with an emptiness in my heart. Now I know it was you. It was always you. I promise to spend every day of the rest of our lives making up for lost time, loving you and our family with all I have." Tears streamed down Susan's face. "Rick, our path wasn't easy, but it led us here. You gave me the greatest gift of my life in Emma, and now you're giving me a second chance at love. I promise to love you, to forgive the past, and to build a bright future together." When they were pronounced husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in cheers. The twins ran to embrace them. During the intimate reception, Emma asked for everyone's attention. "Family," she began, "today is a day of new beginnings, and I have my own announcement." She took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The news was met with gasps of delight and emotional hugs. Rick and Susan pulled their daughter close, tears of happiness in their eyes. Rick felt a wave of joy, tinged with a brief sadness for the child he thought he'd have. As if summoned by the thought, Ashley appeared at the garden entrance, hesitant, holding a small package. A hush fell over the group. Rick gently separated from Emma and walked toward his ex-fiancée. "Ashley," he said, his tone neutral, "we weren't expecting you." She took a step forward. "I know, and I'm sorry to show up uninvited. I needed to see you, all of you." Susan joined Rick, her face showing no anger, only cautious curiosity. Ashley inhaled deeply. "I came to ask for forgiveness. What I did, the lies, the manipulation, was unforgivable. I've spent the last few months in therapy trying to understand my actions and become a better person." She turned to Emma. "Emma, I'm sorry for what I did to you and the girls. You didn't deserve any of it." Emma nodded slowly, acknowledging the words. Jessica then looked at Rick and Susan. "And the two of you, I nearly destroyed something beautiful out of pure selfishness. I'm genuinely happy to see you together, where you belong." Rick felt Susan's hand tighten around his. "Thank you, Ashley," he said softly. "Your honesty means a lot." Ashley extended the package. "It's a gift for the baby," she said to Emma. "I hope you'll accept it." Emma took it with a hesitant smile. "Thank you, Ashley. That's very kind of you." A moment of weighted silence followed, filled with unspoken forgiveness. Then the twins broke the tension, approaching Ashley. "Want a piece of cake?" Chloe asked innocently. "Grandma Susan made it, and it's delicious." Tears welled in Ashley's eyes. I'd love some," she whispered. As the twins led her to the dessert table, the rest of the family exchanged glances. There was still a long road ahead, but this moment of grace felt like a step in the right direction. As the afternoon wore on, the atmosphere grew relaxed and joyful. Rick and Susan danced, lost in each other's eyes. Emily chatted excitedly about her plans for the baby. As the sun dipped low, the family gathered for a photo. Rick and Susan in the center, Emma beside them, the twins in front. After a moment's hesitation, Ashley was invited to join. As the photographer set up, Rick looked at the faces surrounding him, his wife, his daughter, his granddaughters, even the woman who nearly destroyed it all. Each face held a story of pain, forgiveness, and love. "Everyone ready?" the photographer called. "Say, family." As the word echoed through the garden, Rick felt his heart swell with deep, lasting joy. This wasn't the ending he would have ever imagined, but somehow it was infinitely better. The camera's flash captured the moment, not just an image, but a promise of better days, of love overcoming all obstacles, and of a family that, against all odds, had found its way back to each other. As night fell, Rick knew one thing for certain. This wasn't an end, but a new and glorious beginning.